We are recording, everyone. Welcome to Relove Guitars. We got the second of James's two guitars. This one is a Line custom Strat. I don't know much about this. It's a custom built thingy and it's beautifully made. Got to say, it's got a really nice bit of relicing going on. It's got me on the cream color. It's almost verging on the Antigua. It isn't really, but the edging of this plate makes me think Antigua colors. It's not. It's just a nice mix of parchment and creams and stuff and dirt. Anyway, so after yesterday's fun with the PRS DTG, which of course I didn't know is a signature guitar which had reversed volumes. So it had a neck volume where the bridge volume would normally be and the bridge volume where the neck would normally be, and as a result it's, I think, contributed to James struggling or thinking there was a fault or experiencing a fault in the switch. But I have a feeling it had a lot to do with the reversal of that. And actually, when you get a reversed switching arrangement like that, you often think you're doing, what's the word, turning down the one when you in fact turn down the other. And so you think that when you switch the switch, you think one isn't working and so on. Anyhow, thanks to very kind YouTube viewers, I was my misapprehensions were corrected, and but it's just one of those things. I didn't even know of the existence of David Grissom until today or yesterday, so I did some research and enjoyed watching him give a sort of guitar tutorial lecture on stage. Nice sounding guy, interesting use of the guitar. So you live and learn, but it is a bit funny when somebody's quirk ends up creating a thing that's actually hard for most people to play. But there we have it. Anyway, what this is in for a very slight fret level, again, just for the accuracy, and a tiny bit of fret slap. It's in for just putting the tremolo flat, so it's down only. At the moment it's got a little bit of float in it, which makes it a bit unstable. Also the fret ends are quite sharp, so not sharp technically, but they're quite machine edged, so we're going to round those off by hand, and in the sanding out process of the precision leveling we'll take care of that. The nut looks pretty darn good. It's a bone nut, very carefully made. The first fret actions are really good. In terms of the playing action, this is one where James feels this action here is a little bit too high on the treble side, and we talked about that quite a bit, and it raised an interesting thing for me, which is sometimes I've heard it from certain customers who say they want higher playing action because somehow it feels like they're not, the fingers aren't skipping over the strings, or the fingers don't feel like they're going under the strings or whatever. And actually I've sort of thought about this quite a long time, and I can tell you what happens for me is when, so for example, compared to the PRS, which James used as a comparator to this, so the PRS he felt played perfectly and it had a certain action, and we kept the action a little bit higher, as I wrote down yesterday. It was 1.5 on the last fret high E, which I would have gone to about 1.2 normally, and then a little bit higher at 1.75 on the last fret low E as well. So we went down a little lower on the bass side for him, and I think we kept it kind of the same on the treble side. So his description was that guitar felt better to him than this one currently does. Now, what the major difference in the two of them is that one has jumbo frets, which are, to begin with, higher than these. And my experience is that the lower your frets go and the stiffer your gauge of strings, naturally, the harder it becomes to bend, because when you touch down, wish this was easy to photograph up close, so I don't really think I can. Well, I can try and get you a close-up. It's very, well, maybe it's not that difficult. I can't hold it, but okay, so let's say, sorry about my fingernails, they need a clean. So here we have this string, and you know, as you can see, I'm not the best in technique, of course, but I tend to, you know, I'm trying to bend with the third finger here, and so I'm sort of assisting the bend with the other fingers behind it a little bit. Now, on this guitar, I do feel like my fingers want to travel over the top. And the question is then, is what is missing for them? Now, the way I would say this is, some people think, and James is one of them, that believes that, and I'm not saying he's wrong because it's an experiential thing, but his understanding for him is that if this action is higher to begin with, so we imagine it sort of standing higher up like that, then somehow when you bend down, you'll somehow have you'll have a better grip of the string. But if you think about it, we bend down to exactly the same point, whether the start point is, you know, a centimetre high or whether it's a millimetre high. We still end up in the same configuration. And what's at issue here is how much finger material can you get alongside the string. Now, if the flatter these frets are, or the lower the frets are, the less pad of the finger. I don't know if you can see in that sort of, see, there's no, if they're quite low, I can't get any finger. Now, if the frets are higher, let's imagine this isn't just a height of action here, right? Let's imagine the frets reach up to touch this string. Then we touch down onto the fret, and you can see how much more of the string is underneath the pad of my finger. So the higher the fret, the more meat of the finger goes under or alongside the string. The lower the fret, generally speaking, the more the finger is starting pushing without much alongside it and below it. So that to me is the principal reason, or certainly for me, when I think a guitar needs refretting, is when I'm finding myself. Now that's of course not, it's made more likely for that to happen if the strings are a heavier gauge. So if I had 8s on here, I'd probably, you know, suddenly find myself going, that's just wonderful. But for a given set gauge of strings, let's say, this one, you know, the higher frets will give you more push. But, you know, you have to remember that when you are down and you bring the string to the fret, it doesn't really matter. If you think, if I just move a little bit and imagine me now raising the action, right? So that's what you get. If I'd raised the action by a huge amount, really, 2 mils or something at the last fret, right? It actually doesn't feel any different to this bending finger to have this action starting up really high, because the finger presses it down to the fret and we've still got the same. Now, if I was pushing something in front of it, then yes, there would be more. And if it went, perhaps if it went up in a steep gradient behind the fretted one, then possibly these fingers here could get a bit more behind them. But actually not really, because this string is still brought down. So the bringing down the string cancels out all of the so-called advantage of the action if it's playing any part in making it easier. So that's what, James, I was describing to you, and that's, you know, everything I arrive at is only just through a process of logic. I'm not dogmatic about it. That's how I understand it, from a mixture of experience and thinking it through, and, you know, testing one thing against another. So these are quite relatively tall frets, but they're not super high compared to the jumbos on the PRS. So if I do a quick sort of crude measurement using, see, these are 1.3, I'm reading on this one 1.3, so they're not super low. I mean, they would be considered in the jumbo height region, but they're not very wide. Well, actually, if I take an average, I can't tell what the damn thing's reading. It's so unreliable. It's sort of 1.25 to 1.3, 1.2, 1.25. So about 1.2, 1.25 to be on the safe side. Your jumbos will be, and new on that PRS will be about 1.4. So it's amazing that I think that extra little bit for your finger to slide under, I think makes a big difference. That's just my take on it. So having said that, we'll go up to the action that, well, I agreed with James that what I would do is use the PRS measurements at this end as the guide for setting the action here. So if I just get my little hex key thing, and we'll just kind of look over the action as we got here. So what have we got to start with? We're probably about 1.5 already on the last fret, and it isn't far off. So that's actually 1.25 there, and we've got, I would say we've got one there, 1.25 to 1. So that is pretty low for starters. Now if I put it up to the PRS level, as using it as the sort of, what do we call it, reference point, let's do it only to the PRS level, and I'd be interested to see what James is sort of feeling about its playability. I need a better one of these, because that is just slightly worn, getting worn, and it's going to spin if I'm not careful. So I'll get a fresher thing. So I said, did I say I'm going to go 175? That's quite high. So it's quite a big change. That's the thing. So first of all, no, let me just back up a second. I'm going to do something I should have done from the beginning, and that is I'm going to take this off, and I'm going to just dial in the tremolo so it's decked at the back. So in other words, it's sitting on the body, so we don't have it floating about. So, and then we'll set the action from there. The thing about when the thing starts to float, your action changes as it floats. In the sort of standard range of floating tremolo for 3 semitones on the G, 2 on the B, and 1/2 of the semitone. Sorry, 1 semitone, not half of the semitone. So 3, 2, and 1 on the G, B, and E respectively. That tends to raise, to float to that scope of movement, that tends to raise the playing action by 0.5 millimeter. So it's very good to know that. Now this is we've got a what's the word, aged thing going on here, but it's a bit rusty. I mean, I guess that's, people kind of like that. Rusty screws worry me, but it's not the end of the world if you have to replace them if they do break. But yeah, rust, I guess that's about as genuine as you can get, having rusty. Not sure I'd want rust myself, but so what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial this in until we're on the deck under normal tuning tension. A bit more movement there. What I've also noticed on this is that the I'll show you, the pick guard is very, very close to the bridge on this side, and that can have, see that, I would not, well, I would be fairly confident that that is touching there, which may interrupt the return to pitch or the movement. So we shall see. I don't want to scrape it or cut it if it's not causing any problem, but it's just it's one of those little things that makes me nervous. Now, what's interesting is that we've got as much, I know for a fact we've got as much force on those springs, should be holding this down, but the reason it's not holding it down is that these screws on the tremolo appear, if I'm not totally mistaken, to have been screwed in a little bit too far. I don't know if that's in the factory, but they need to be a little, they may be okay, but let's just, I'm going to back them off just a tiny bit so that they're not too bad actually, but I just want to make sure they're not holding this front, I don't know what the word is, bevel, chamfer. We don't want it to be held down at all, so we want this to sit freely on the deck. Let's have a look at that. They are all just about floating, but slightly above. But I just want to make sure of it, to be absolutely sure. Come on, thank you. It only takes one to be pressing down for the whole thing to be fighting the springs on the other side. Yeah, I think we're just about on there. Okay. So let's go back to the main action. I should use this mirror. I've got this mirror standing here and it's supposed to tell me what I'm looking at, and I'm too lazy to use it sometimes, sorry. So we're going to go to the weirdest. That 175 is a big hike upwards. So, but no, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to set it as I would normally have it. And what I'm going to do then is go up from that. Okay, so we'll go back to the 1.5 and we'll take it all the way. We'll raise the E a little bit, but I'm going to start it at 1.5 over here on the base side. And we're going to go over as if it was one of mine. So I'm going a little bit lower than the PRS. But I'm bringing the treble side up a little bit. Now this now is too low on the A, so I wouldn't try and play that because it would be fighting me. So I want just under 1.5 there, still only on 125. Alright, let's just look this end. Slightly different. These are slightly different grub screw lengths. How weird is that on the same saddle? Weird stuff. Okay, 1.5-ish. Coming down. Close. Let's see if I can just bring it down to where it should be. Just over 125. That's just on 125 on the G, so that's a little bit too low, too quick. And those are slightly different lengths as well. The G just over 125. That's on 1 already, which is too low. So we'll bring that up, and we'll go for my settings to begin with, right? 1.25 on the treble side and 1.5 on the bass side. And what I'll do is I'll level to that because I know that will work. And then what we'll do is we will set it up for a little higher than I would have, and then James can work it a tiny bit down from there if he wishes. If the extra height doesn't return into that improvement in the playability. Okay, so this high E is too high now. Still too high. Okay, 125, 125. Little over, going over 150. Right, good. So that's that. I checked the relief and it's almost exactly the same as on the PRS, and the first fret action is pretty good, and I'm happy with that. So I'm now going to tune it. No, I'm not. I'm going to take slack the strings off for a second. In fact, I'm going to use the screwdriver thing just to get them off. Okay, so you over there, you here. So hopefully this will be nice and straightforward. So I'll do the fret leveling first, then I will recrown, and as or after I've recrowned, I will do the ends as well to soften them off so they are not as round, as sharp. I explained to James that one of the things is when you have a beautifully machined or block cut fret ends done with an end beveling block, One of the beauties of that is that, first of all the strings are flush with the fingerboard edge. The other good thing is that they look great because they're very kind of machine finished. But the downside is that they can feel a little bit sharp. And so the only way to soften that off is to round them off a little bit. So of course in doing that, you lose the sort of that beauty of the mathematical laser cut end shape, which is a very, very handsome arch shape. It's very precise, but it you know, that's what I'm saying, you lose the, you get sharp. If it, with the precision cut comes sharpness. Okay, so set. That sounds a tiny bit flat. What I'm going to do is I'll do an adjustment first while I've got these particular strings. What I've realised is that, not unsurprisingly, James put all of the strings with these guitars in the one bag in the PRS, and I didn't pick out a set of strings to bring for this guitar, so I'll do everything except restring it tonight, and I'll take it home and put the new strings on, because they are the Dario XL types. So to my ear that sounds slightly flat, but to the tuner, it likes it. That's on. Good. It peaks a little bit as you make the attack part of the note, and then it settles back down to the main note. Sharp, settled. Slightly sharp. Okay. Okay, starting sharp. Looking at the pattern, I think that's a problem with the string. Trust me, you wait and see. Well, I can only tell you because I won't be able to do it on camera necessarily, but it's not important right this second, but the fact that the rest of them are pretty much spot on and that one isn't, I will suspect the string, which is quite common, not unusual. It's not unusual to be messed up by dud strings. Okay. That action set where I want it, my normal action, which may be a fraction too low on the treble side for you, James, but that's okay. We're going to do the leveling with that action set, and then we can make the adjustment when you come to pick it up. If it feels better higher, that's an easy adjustment to do. All that you get is a slight change in the tuning, which you just don't So as with yesterday's PRS, we're going to calibrate our banana leveling beam, and okay, so this one got possibly maybe a tiny shard more relief than yesterday's PRS, and it's so small that I've gone a micro millimeter the other direction. It's more of a feel thing than a kind of looking how much you crank the little thingy there, because it really doesn't, you couldn't measure it. You have to feel it and then just test it, and you'll know when you're on it. So again, like yesterday with the PRS, here we go, just leveling to begin with, very light, just to get a look at the topography of this neck as it presents itself to us. And as if my statements yesterday were true about the fact that how every neck has, when it's under load, has its own series of ups and downs. We've got clearly, I don't know if you can see with the dust and everything, but just that little bit of work there. We've got a tiny bit of cutting, a bit less, a little bit of a low spot, tiny bit of cutting, higher, high spot, and you can see the dust gathering there. See that? So around about there is a high spot. There is one or two low, but a low one there on number 3. So it goes up to high, and then it comes down to low, completely low, and everything here is low. This entire section is low compared to anywhere else. So it's not cutting at all. So that's a trench, which is very interesting because we haven't done much leveling, but you can, when the light's right, when the light is right, there you go, you can see these 4 are cutting. These 8 or so here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These 8 aren't cutting hardly at all, not at all. There we are. And then suddenly it goes high here, low there, and high again, or normal again at the end. So you can see that we're a little dip there, okay, a little rise there relative to everything else, and then a trench all the way along here with a little kick up at the end. Isn't that interesting? That's a totally different topography of that particular neck. It's got its own idiosyncratic thingamy-jigs that is different to the PRS, so it's unique to that guitar. And you know, even though it plays pretty well, what you're seeing there is a little bit of inherent unevenness. Now what's great about this method, as I've said before, is even though that's currently low, the only reason it's going to cause any problems is on bending up from this little ditch. And at the moment, there's nothing that when I bend, I can't even bend it to more than a tone. Yeah, so that whatever the dip here is, it's not enough to cause a major problem. And what I would find is, if we were interested in doing it, we could probably just add a little bit more attention to this track, the high E track, and I'm going to put a little tiny bit more downward pressure at this end to see what comes of it. And I would expect that almost straight away we would suddenly start touching some of these frets. Well, we are just about, some of them, 1 or 2 there, but interestingly it's still telling us we've got a lift in the middle. Now sometimes, not always, but occasionally you can actually spot this, but oh, I can. My eyeballs, I think I can. Sorry about this. I think I can see a slight kick up, and that's just the wood. You know, it doesn't go straight under load, simple as that. Anyway, I don't really care about getting to the bottom of that, as long as I can play all those notes and there's no bends choking out, which is good. So now I'll move on to the the B track, and I'll use the same calibration on the B track as I did for the E track. Again, like I said yesterday, we sort of more or less expect to see the same high spots, because while they sometimes change as you move across the radius, they don't usually change completely in one track movement. So where it was high before, you'll usually see some sign of it being high again. So I'm touching down here and a tiny bit here. So the lowness was most extreme, or the dip here is most extreme at the edge. It's now a bit less pronounced in the B track. So I think this would probably be okay for the B. But again, playing is the referee, arbiter. Okay, now we're going to recalibrate for the G. So as with the PRS, one thing about doing this for many years, using this technique, is I know how much or how little material is taken off by this process, and it's very, very little. So anybody who's nervous, I can actually put that there. Anybody who's nervous about, you know, is that taking away a lot of fret material? I can tell you, even though it's cut a couple of tops there, that's the most metal it's taking, and that's still a very small amount. And we'll see that when I come to recrown the frets in a minute. So calibration stayed the same on this G track, although I checked it didn't need adjusting. And now I would imagine that these frets down here and what was a dip, we may reach them slightly better now. It may get the tool maybe just about touching more of them. For some reason, often that dip, valley feels a bit more pronounced at the edges. We're still high here. This is a pronounced hump in the middle of this neck. Now, you know, interestingly, some people, not this brand I don't suppose, but I have no idea, I could be wrong, but some guitars that have been through a plec process, I still find this kind of thing here. Yeah, sometimes I'll find an unusual hump in a neck that's been plecked, and it shows up as still being proud, if you like, because yeah, the tool finds it. And I guess one of the things that I lose track of, because I'm doing this all day myself, but one of the things I don't keep an eye on all the time is how many people worldwide use this method now. I mean, it's not millions, it's not even tens of thousands, but it may well be a couple of thousand people at least, as a result of watching what I do with this, who now use this method. And the number of people I've had write to me with stories of how it worked for them. Sometimes it's stories of how they struggled a bit to begin with and then understood the technique better and so on. And then, you know, most people just thrilled at how much they've improved their guitar collection with leveling using this technique. And you know, and some of them who I quite regularly meet up with on a Zoom one-to-one, a Zoom group Q&A, which is part of the Golden Banana Hack membership, where you get a kit with the bits and pieces, and you also get to join in on those once every 2 months, those Q&A sessions, and they really are focused on getting right into the details of this technique. Nice, I'm happy with that. Let me just check one down here. A tiny little bit of, I mean, I'm being really hypercritical here since this is pretty good. I'm just going to do a tiny bit more. And when I say I'm going to focus on this end, what it just means is I'm going to, where there's a low fret here, I'm just going to sort of put a tiny bit more pressure on this bit here, just to clean up that, what I would call a little zizz going on there. And that's all I'm going to do. Of course it touches the other frets too, but I'm, inverted commas, focused more on a particular spot. And that just means I'm pressing a little bit down. Yeah, so every 2 months, people who've bought the golden banana pack and using it on their guitars, join me for sometimes 1.5 to 2 hour live chat where we all discuss people's experiences, and people can ask questions about sort of detailed technical questions about what happens if, and why doesn't this happen when I do that, and so on. And it's great for some people because it helps them to overcome sometimes stumbling blocks where they've got nervous about something and kind of ground to a halt, and get them over that hump and back to creating results. And quite a few of the people who join me for those talks are people who have ended up doing setups for their friends and band member friends and so on, you know, and I think it comes from quite simply that people get to hear or feel their playability of their guitars, and before you know it, they're asking, could you do that for mine? Even though sometimes the people didn't intend to do it as a business or service. Tiny bit more. Yeah, so even though they didn't intend to do it as a paid service, some people find themselves moving into it, and it's probably a little bit like how it was for me. And I didn't really start out with a plan initially to do this for a living. But, you know, sometimes you get into doing it and you can really enjoy it, and then I guess for me, then some circumstances change, and you know, you think, well, I can't do that anymore. You know, what you might have been doing before, and you think, well, I could do this. I enjoy this. Why don't I do a bit more of this since I'm already doing it? You know, I've got a house full of guitars that I'm doing for somebody, and it can become. Sometimes you can fall into it. There was an interesting thread on one of those Facebook guitar luthier type pages the other day, and a guy was asking, he said, you know, I'm a kind of handyman type of person. I'm good with my hands and wood, and I love guitars and I love tinkering with them. You know, what advice would you give to get into doing this as a career or living? And it's always an interesting question, because you know, I can only ever answer my experience of it, and I don't want to put people off doing it, and I don't want to over encourage them in, you know, in a sort of false sense of whatever. So I have to be very honest about how it works for me, and my answer is usually something like, the short version is, if you want to do something that's extremely rewarding and that you have a real sense of agency and control, you know, you can choose how you do what you do and how you do it, and something that really feels like it makes a difference. Still very low over here, not touching at all, quite high cutting here. So, you know, gonna keep on testing it, make sure it plays, and then we'll not worry about it not quite evening out completely. So we've got a bit here, and that's because we're in the hole here. We're in the ditch here, and this last bit here is getting in the way. When we fret a string here, it hits on those because they're higher. They're not higher than anything else, but these are lower. So I need to put a little bit more time into leveling at this end. Yeah, so if you like making a difference to people that's really tangible, and if it matters to you to be working with something you like and choosing what you do and how you do it, the quality by which you do it, then it's a priceless thing. How much money is that worth? Because the truth is, it's also a bit of a subsistence existence. It's limited by the fact there's only one of you, and you've only got so much time and energy to work on guitars. So just about good. Yeah, so yeah, you're limited. It's not a scalable thing, and there are some sorts of ways you might figure out how to scale it, but more or less it's limited to you and what you can do. And I also pointed out that if you wanted to try and do more of it and expand, take on more people, then suddenly you're an employer of guitar techs, and you'd also probably have to be a manager of a premises, which would probably be some kind of music store. So suddenly you're a bunch of things that you weren't last week when you just loved setting up guitars, as kind of we all do, or tinkering with guitars. So it's very quick. It can change very quickly if you need to make more of a living out of it. And my worry would be for a lot of people getting into it is that if they have to make if they're forced into making a sort of business that you can scale up, either by employing more people or by expanding your range of products and selling objects and things at markup, then it could be very quickly very difficult for somebody who's much more interested in the guitar end of it. And I think I've seen people in the past who have gone into, they started out as people who love doing what we're doing here, fixing guitars, making them better, and so on and so forth. And then and they probably got into making them as well as setting them up, and somebody's kind of given them an idea about, I tell you what, why don't you make produce your own range of guitars? And that sounds pretty appealing at some point to a lot of people. And then they go and, of course, there's a lot of Chinese people, factory owners or agents out there who are just looking to convert their extra capacity in their factories into some sort of business deal with a Western distributor, who's going to pay them for producing stuff, and the worry about who you're going to sell it to in Europe is down to you, son. We'll produce it and fill the warehouse for you, as long as you pay us the big money. And that's quite tempting, because there's nothing quite as exciting as seeing your own guitar and playing your own guitar. But suddenly, I think people who get into that can quite quickly find themselves having to be businessmen first and foremost, and actually the skills to make a business and be willing to find ways to reduce costs and improve profitability in that slightly hard-nosed way that we've got to be. That can actually be quite an anathema to people who are much more interested in the creative side of all of this, which is probably more why they got into it. So I think it's a risk you've got to be aware of. If you don't want to find yourself doing something that actually, when you stop and think about it, you don't really care too much about. Because if you did, you'd probably be running a business anyway, selling toilet rolls or something. I'm not saying everybody has to, but what I'm trying to say is a lot of business people just like running a business. They're often less attached to the what the business is doing than the fact that it's doing business and making money in a certain kind of way. And I think that it can quite quickly get to a point where some people, they're too far in before they realise actually they're not that much interested in business. They're interested in, you know, fixing guitars for their friends in a certain kind of way, or for a small number of customers that they can manage on their own. So I think it's what you don't want to do is to get, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars into mass producing guitars when you know, before you discover that, oh, I'm not really that into being a factory boss, or you know, being a guitar importer exporter, especially not with all the world of tariff stuff going on, and you know how difficult it can get. Anyway, but some people actually love that too, and it suits them just fine. I'm not saying it's for everybody. So what I'm going to do now, just quickly, is I'm going to mark up the frets again. Having done the leveling, now I'm going to do the thingying, the crowning, because the leveling puts a flat spot on the frets. It does by default. There's no way around it. That's how you level them, get them down. And of course, we've leveled them in relation to each other, the way they sit when they're under tension or under compression. And that's really important. That this is why this method works particularly well, because it does the leveling under compression. And as my tool has shown, under compression the neck does some things that actually we don't really expect. It shows that there are mountainous regions with some hills and some valleys. So as we level with the effects of the compression at play, pushing the frets slightly up and out of line, what we do in order to level them is we take down the high spots of the ones that need taking down, because they're pushed into that position. And the reason we do it under tension is because that's how you're going to be playing it. So when you see people leveling frets with the neck strings off and the neck dialed flat like this, if they're leveling with a beam like this, yes, you're making them level relative to each other with the neck unstrung and on the bench. But as soon as you put it under string tension, if what I'm saying is right, and the neck bunches into this interesting and unique topography, then you've reintroduced a whole bunch of unevenness, because the frets go with the hills and the valleys. So you can see these three here, I'm doing more leveling on, more recrowning on, because they took more to level, because this part of the neck is sticking up. There's no point hoping to change the shape of the neck, because it will do what it wants to do every time you load it. So the best thing we can do is to level it while it's loaded. And now I could tell you that in a sense this wouldn't be technically level now, but it will be when we put it back under compression. And that's the beauty of this method. So what I'll do is, once I've scooped along here, now these, you'll notice that I'm just whizzing through these. There's nothing to level here. Okay, there's no black marker, because all this was in the ditch. Now as we get through to here, we will suddenly find some more flat spots that we need to level out on these last few frets. And here we go, we're back into it with that one there, the 18th. Yeah, I think it's the 18th, 19th. Anyway, and this one here, 20th, or it's only 21 frets, I think. So 20th fret here, bit of leveling to do, which is getting in the way of the frets that are low down here, or getting in the way of the strings. And then this last one, which was quite high relative to the low valley of frets down here. So amazing system. Like I say, I've been using it for 10 years non-stop, and I wouldn't change back. There's no reason that jumps out and says there's a better way of doing this. I've not found a better way of doing it, which is why I continue to do it this way. Now we've got the next process. Got some files here. This one's a concave one, and if I just run it fairly quickly over the ends of the frets and files, too similar. Over the end of the frets, what we do is we just round off the frets, frets. We round off the frets slightly, and it's not a massive amount, but it just takes that sharpness, because sometimes you don't realize is that when you end bevel frets, the end beveling file puts a precise blade almost. It cuts these so precisely that where the two planes meet, the plane of the fret going this way and the plane of the cut across the top, where they meet, you get a razor sharp edge, which we have to, one way or another, soften. So I'm doing it here with the help of this concave file, and it just allows me to sort of round off some of that sharp edgedness, and it's not a lot of hard work, it's just a little bit just to take it away. And then of course we've got to swap it round and do it up the other way, something like this. So in my attempt to resize the thing, I've done this a few times, I end up switching the camera off. And sometimes I don't know when I've done it and I will lose the whole chunk. So I just restarted. Hopefully I won't have lost too much off the iPhone camera, but who knows. Anyway, so what I'm doing is I'm just putting that little bit of rollover on these very sharp surfaces of the fret ends. And then what I'll do after that is I'll use the smaller file to go down and just clean up any potential burr right in the corner of these frets where they meet the fingerboard. Okay, so that's that. Finer fret with a file, finer file with a soft edge on it, so I can just go into the corners and just make sure there's no little burr right in the corner. And then you can, if you like it even softer than that, you can kind of concentrate on running little rolls of sandpaper up and down on the frets, just to make them as rounded as they can possibly be. You'll see on some modern guitars now, they're made in the factory with semi-hemispherical fret ends, and they are done so that the end of the fret presents no sharp face, of course, so there's no end beveling involved, no running down the side of the fret. But of course, if you make every fret end into a semi-hemispherical thingy, you're doing it by hand, and you are guessing. If you're a China, you've probably got a machine that does it, but here I would have to be hand finishing every fret to the exact length. And then what you gain in that lovely rounded, sort of weird globular looking finish on the end of the fret, you kind of lose in the straight line symmetry of all the frets. Because the one thing about beveling with the end beveling file or end beveling block is that you get a straight edge that follows, the frets ruthlessly follow the edge of the fingerboard or the edge of the neck, so you don't find it wandering. But when you're doing them by hand, it's very, very, very difficult to install them in a straight line. It's maybe possible, but I haven't quite succeeded in doing it to my satisfaction. So I guess it's a technique that I should probably practice on a little bit more, because in a way, not having to run a end beveling file down the edge of the fingerboard would save me quite a lot of time and grief in certain areas, because that technique does scuff up the side of the finish on the fingerboard, and quite often I have to do a touch up. So what you gain in the sort of crisp simplicity of you lose in having to, you know, take up or touch up with finish, mainly because the end beveling file cannot cut these flush without touching the finish. It's just physically impossible. If you stop short of touching the finish, you're stopping short of cutting the fret ends, and therefore their ends stick out like a little blade kind of thing, so you don't want that. So what I'm going to do, like the PRS yesterday, I'm going to now mask off all of these frets, and as I sand them out, I'm going to make sure I include the ends with the sandpaper so that they soften up as well. So this will be a softer experience afterwards. There's a little bit about the alignment which I'll just slack off when we restring it. I'll have to do that at home really. I'm going to restring it at home. I'll check the alignment and maybe move the neck a tiny bit, but that'll be a home thing because we don't have the strings here. Meanwhile, what I'll do is I won't bother showing you through all of this because I did it on the one yesterday. Go back one video if you want to see covering it up in masking tape. It's long and boring, and I've got to cut some new small strips and stuff. So I'll recharge my phone and get ready. Actually, well, I won't even come back, will I? No, this is going to be, sorry about this. This is going to be the end of the video because I've recrowned the files. They're frets, Sam, not files. They begin with F. I've recrowned the frets. All I'm going to do now is spend a lot of time covering up the fingerboard. I'm going to sandpaper for about half an hour, which is noisy and messy. Then I'm going to clean it up. And in this case, I'm going to re-oil the fingerboard and put it in the case and take it home. So really, that's it. I might, if I get a chance to just put a tiny bit on the end of this video to show it restrung, then I will. But otherwise, thank you for watching, and I will see you soon.